Today on CityCast Nashville, we're talking about Nashville General Hospital with Nashville Banner reporter Stephen Elliott. The hospital's CEO has just stepped down, a concerning fiscal audit has just been released, and the building itself has been in disrepair for years. We'll explain how we got here and what might come next. It's Monday, March 10th. I'm your executive producer, Whitney Pasterek, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Dr. Joseph Webb, who's been the CEO of Nashville General since 2015, has stepped down after a board committee recommended his contract not be extended. His last day is this Friday, March 14th. But let's start here for everybody at home. What is Nashville General Hospital?
Nashville General is a publicly supported safety net hospital, they call it. It will see anyone, whether they have insurance or not. And it's been on Meharry Medical College's campus for a few decades now. And the city sets aside some amount every year to support them. And in the last few years, it's been in the $50 to $60 million range.
So let's get into why Dr. Webb resigned. It happened at the same time as, number one, a hospital authority board committee recommended that his contract not be renewed. And then also at the same time as Metro released what the Tennessean called a scathing audit, finding that the hospital paid nearly $4.6 million for contracts for clinical and non-clinical expenses without board approval. In that same article, the Tennessean noted that Webb has also been accused of nepotism, favoritism, and bullying. It should be noted that Dr. Webb told the board that his decision to resign had nothing to do with this audit and should not be seen as a sign of guilt. But I have questions, Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of seems like his decision to resign had a lot to do with this audit.
Some of these reports were compiled and delivered to the board members in kind of the days and weeks leading up to these decisions. I think sort of intentionally, I'm not saying that someone was trying to push him out. Maybe that was the case, but I think it was more, they wanted the board to have as much information as possible. This most recent audit, Nashville General has every year. Usually it's kind of hoped that it's done by October 31 because it's for a fiscal year. So that gives them a quarter to do it.
Oh, fiscal years have no meaning here in Nashville anymore. So just ask the Arts Commission.
One of the big hangups was that Nashville General wasn't getting its information in. And so Metro itself, the city government, couldn't fill out its annual financial report that's due at the end of the calendar year in December. So the city had to get an extension from the state because they were waiting on Nashville General's information. So that was a whole issue. And then once the information came in, there were a lot of these accounting issues that have been in repeated audits. One of these, I called it a dossier, but that makes it sound very dramatic. It's just a document, a compilation of several financial reports, the last few audits. It's a lot of the same findings year after year after year. And that's what some of the Metro audit and Metro finance people were kind of raising alarms about, is some of these findings, whether it's them not calculating their revenue or making sure that they're getting the right money coming in and going out.
There was also something about a doctor practicing there who didn't have a contract, who was just like using the space, like some sort of like WeWork.
Yeah, I don't know if it's quite as as simple as that. I think there is a lot of interplay. The professors who work at Meharry practice with Nashville General. It's sort of this incestual thing. So that was a weird one. I don't know the full explanation for that. Webb did say there was nothing to that, but there were some other findings that I think were a little more clear in that. And then there was also an investigation, which is something the audit department does less frequently, but it's in response to allegations from people in and around the hospital who had raised concerns about some of the stuff you mentioned earlier, including the contracts that were not approved by the board. And then some other contracts that were falsified was the word they used after the fact. They hadn't been signed by either party. And then media outlets requested a copy of the contracts, and they went back and did the work then.
Oh, no.
Yeah. There's the PSA, which it might be too in the weeds to get into. Essentially, Meharry and Nashville General have this agreement, professional services agreement, a PSA, that governs how the people who work at Meharry also work at Nashville General, to bring it down to its most basic form. And that expired in 2023, and they've just been working without one since then and just kind of feeling it out. That is a big issue, I think, for a lot of the board members in particular, and from Metro and from Meharry. I mean, everyone really think that's a priority in the near term.
Did that contribute to the suggested departure of Dr. Webb as well?
Issues around that contributed to the decision, issues around communication about it. There was in the investigative report that came out, there was a part about this where Dr. Webb had met with the mayor late last year and said, we're meeting with Meharry about the PSA, regularly, things are going well. And then the mayor's office talked to Meharry and they said, we don't meet, there's no progress. And so I think from the Metro side, they were frustrated by a lack of perceived progress on that front.
So as you mentioned earlier, Nashville General is located on Meharry Medical College's campus. And Meharry, which is one of our local historically Black colleges and universities, also uses Nashville General to train its doctors, to train its students. That's why they would need that professional services agreement. But that relationship has become contentious of late, correct?
Yes. And I interviewed James Hildreth, who's the head of Meharry. And during COVID, I'm sure you guys will remember, he sort of became this kind of grandfatherly, comforting figure. He appeared at a lot of the press conferences talking about COVID because his scientific expertise is that sort of stuff. But anyway, so he's become this very well-known figure locally. But I interviewed him, and he did acknowledge that the relationship has grown pretty strained in the last couple of years, but he also said that it has been strained before that.
At the most recent council meeting last Tuesday, Dr. Chike Nziroe, who's the chair of internal medicine at Meharry, has just been appointed to the board of Nashville General by Mayor Freddie O'Connell and was confirmed by Metro Council. Who is he, and why was the Metro Council's minority caucus originally against this appointment?
Yeah, I've been following this for a few weeks, and it's been pretty interesting to me, which board appointments aren't always that interesting. But he's the head of internal medicine at Meharry, so he's kind of a senior leader over there. And the mayor appointed him to the Hospital Authority Board, which oversees Nashville General, several weeks ago. A lot of times appointments like that go through council pretty quickly without too much debate. But yeah, the minority caucus threw up a red flag and said part of their concern was that they thought he would have a conflict because he works for Meharry and the hospital board oversees Nashville General, and Nashville General and Meharry were sort of at odds. And so it might be a conflict for him to be making decisions about the future of the hospital when it was in conflict with his main employer. The Hospital Authority Board made that decision, and Joseph Webb, the head of the hospital, he objected to the term resign, but he's leaving before the end of his contract, so I don't really know what other word to use. So the minority caucus sort of backed off. His nomination sailed through council at the most recent meeting. I think they backed off in part because this decision about the hospital CEO had been made. So part of that conflict maybe was gone, though there still remains some conflict, obviously.
Yeah, this is a lot of threads to sort of pull apart and then weave back together. So the concern was that the conflict between Meharry and Nashville General would pose an issue for Dr. Nziroe. But then once Dr. Webb decided to depart his position...
In passive voice, yes.
That somehow resolved that potential conflict. Does that mean that the conflict was really between Dr. Webb and Meharry?
I wouldn't say exclusively that's the case, but there has been a bit of a sort of personality clash. I've covered a lot of disputes in my time, and it is somewhat rare for people at this level to, elected officials, or in this case, public officials in some way, to be so open about their disagreements with someone else of that level. And Hildreth at Meharry in our interview was basically open about the fact that he didn't say fire Joseph Webb, but if you read between the lines, that's basically what he was saying. This relationship can only improve with new leadership at the hospital. And Webb himself is not shy about making statements either. So I think, yeah, there was a bit of a personality clash going on.
My favorite place in Nashville to take friends from out of town is the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum. It makes me feel so proud to be able to show off our city's country music roots. But y'all, it's not just a tourist attraction. Did you know that local kids always visit free at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum? Kids age 18 and under who are residents of Davidson and bordering counties, including Cheatham, Robertson, Rutherford, Sumner, Williamson, and Wilson, can take advantage of all the engaging and educational activities the museum has to offer this spring at no cost. Plus, they can bring 2 accompanying adults who get 25% off admission. I love the museum's Taylor Swift Education Center. They've got music, dance, art programs, and on Fridays this month, you can check out Irish step dancing, a musical instrument petting zoo, and plenty of other fun activities. Learn more and plan your visit at countrymusichaloffame.org/local-kids.
Speaking of expensive contracts, and this is going to take us down another side lane, who is Jerry Maynard?
Jerry Maynard is a longtime public figure in Nashville. He was on the Metro Council years ago. He's not a lawyer currently, but he's been a lawyer for Meharry, in fact, but also longtime consultant, etc., consigliere at Nashville General. He's a political consultant, a lobbyist. He ran for state senate a few years ago. And he's just a kind of a big figure in local politics. And he has this kind of longstanding relationship with Webb and with Nashville General. And some of his contracts were some of the ones that were included in that investigation.
Right. I was looking into it, and it does look like in 2018, he received a PR contract, or his consulting firm received a PR contract for $150,000 secretly and without board approval. And then in 2023, I found a story in the Tennessee Lookout that said he got lobbying and PR contracts for close to $500,000, while the hospital budget is several million dollars in the red. Has anyone given any justification for the amount of money that a PR and lobbying firm is making amidst all of this other chaos?
I mean, I've heard him defend it, and he would say that he's helping the hospital, with its relations with council and the Metro government, which is responsible for a lot of that budget. So I think he would probably defend it on those terms, saying like that money is what you need to play in those circles.
Is that money taxpayer money?
Nashville General's budget is not fully Metro money. It's a minority of their revenue every year. They get money from Medicaid and Medicare and insurance companies and people who are paying cash for services and other stuff too.
But that's just another example of things being a little bit fiscally fuzzy over there, it seems to me. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. There have been questions about his work with Nashville General dating back for several years.
And he was in favor of Webb staying on.
Yes. One incident that really came into play, I think, in the board deliberations was an appearance that he made at the Metro Council Minority Caucus back in January that I was at. He was very open about his thoughts at that time, especially about the mayor and the mayor's office and Metro, and also in particular about the board itself and some of its more recent nominees, who he basically said they don't know anything about Nashville General, they don't know anything about North Nashville. And it personally offended at least one of the board members who brought that up. But I don't know what the others thought. But his sort of vociferous support for Webb and his position was definitely a highlight of the situation.
Some residents did speak up in praise of Webb at that review committee meeting where they recommended not extending his contract. One noted, quote, "This city has a troubling pattern. When Black leaders demonstrate excellence, deliver measurable results, and uplift institutions, they are targeted and discredited." And then I want to read another quote from Councilmember Quante Toombs around Dr. Nziroway's appointment, stating that Dr. Nziroway's appointment represents another attempt to use a minority candidate to pacify the minority caucus and deflect from the more serious issue at hand, the future of Nashville General. So now you've got people on both sides of this issue saying there are problems here that have to do with race. And I guess my question to you, Stephen, would be, number one, what's your take on that? And number two, does the largely white leadership of the city have the tools it needs to deal with this appropriately?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It definitely came up in those board discussions. There were moments, I mean, particularly on that CEO review committee, where one Black member of the board, she didn't vote against ending his contract, but she did offer support for him, whereas the non-Black members were the ones who were the most vocal about him needing to go. And then you saw, and the quote that you read from someone speaking in public comment was an SEIU representative who's also Black. And so there is this issue at play. But I think it's interesting also to note, and I was wrestling with this throughout that process, was that Meharry and Nashville General are both these kind of institutions in Black Nashville, and they're something that people are proud of and want to see thrive. And they're at odds, so it's not exactly clear cut, I guess. And like you said, Dr. Nzirwe is Black as well and comes from Meharry, and so it's thorny, I guess.
Will the fiscal audits go away now that Dr. Webb has stepped down? Are we seeing any threats from finance that, like, we're just going to take over Nashville General the same way they've threatened to, like, just take over arts? I'm
not sure that they have the authority to do that fully in the same way, because it's not a department like that. But Metro Finance is paying close attention. Janine Reed, who's the new finance director, is working with staff there and the finance committee of the Hospital Authority Board to try to work on a plan to improve this stuff. There's been a good amount of turnover on the board, and obviously now there's going to be turnover in leadership. So I think that people at Metro Finance and Metro in general probably are hopeful that they can kind of turn a new page and get things on track.
All right. So the hospital needs a new director. They also need a new building. A Nashville Post article from 2022 says it's, quote, beyond repair. In January, Webb told the Tennessean that they were planning a $500 to $700 million new campus on like 25 acres. They'd talked for a long time about going to Metro Center. There's also reports, though, that Nashville General is housing as few as like 30 patients a night in their beds. And so while some members of the community are rallying behind building a beautiful new facility, and they have for years, some people are questioning the demand for a whole new campus. What's your take on all of this, and what are their options?
I think people on all sides of the issue agree that the current building is probably not suitable for what it's being used for. It's an old building, and one interesting thing that came out of my interview with Hildreth at Meharry is he actually said, we don't need it to be on our campus. I think it is probably pretty convenient for them to have it across the street. He said it should go where the people who use it can best access it. And he specifically mentioned Antioch, but he said it could be somewhere else in the city. And then back in January, Jerry Maynard at that meeting with the Minority Caucus said that Webb was also open to places beyond that Metro Center site that they had targeted. And I think what took people by surprise when they had said, we want to go to this property, was just the lack of discussion with other stakeholders. It's also Metro Parks and the mayor's office.
Wait, how is Parks involved?
Because the property that they cited is owned by Metro Parks and is used by Metro Parks. And Parks said, we like this land as it is, and people use it for, I think there's sports fields there maybe. They basically announced, we want to build our hospital here, but hadn't run that by the people who control that land.
You brought up the mayor. What's the mayor doing in all of this?
He has appointed several members, including the one we've discussed today. In January, I got some records back that showed that he's met individually with all of the members of the hospital board in January. And I've asked his office what those meetings were about. And basically, they said that they had heard from the board members that they were struggling to get information from the hospital staff, which is, obviously the board and the staff should be, in communication, and they were struggling to get financial information. They were struggling to get updates from leadership. That's what was conveyed to me. And so the mayor was meeting with them to try to figure out how we can improve this, I guess.
I'm still trying to put this all together. So you've got a hospital that's functioning, staffed by people at a school that's mad at the hospital, and they're spending money that's not being approved by their board, to which they may or may not speak.
More or less. I'd like to go back to the question about the necessity of the new facility. So Hildreth mentioned that in our interview as well. He said, sometimes it can be as low as 30. And when you have a full medical college with residents and students, he says it's hard to educate them and get them trained up when there's that low number of patients. And so they're having to go to other places in the region. And he said even some of them are going out of state for some of this work. His idea is he wants a new hospital built. And he thinks that with more collaboration with the rest of the city, that would include working with the bigger hospitals, Vanderbilt and TriStar and Ascension in particular, to kind of coordinate who should be doing what, because certain things are cheaper to do in certain types of facilities and certain things are cheaper to do in other types of facilities. So I think like a hospital like Vanderbilt is more equipped to do transplants, for instance, is one thing he brought up. And minor things that can be done in like an urgent care setting, it's much more expensive to do those in an emergency room. So I guess his idea is to bring together those hospitals, some of these nonprofits that are here that work on this issue, and some of that like healthcare industry that's based here, to try to figure out a way to make the hospital thrive, I guess, in terms of patient revenue, honestly, and just having more people getting those services, which helps the people getting the services, but it also helps Meharry train future doctors.
But should the city's safety net hospital be expected to earn revenue in the same way that a big commercial facility like a Vanderbilt or an Ascension can? Ultimately, this is where when someone at Open Table discovers an unhoused neighbor in distress, Nashville General is where they can take them.
No, and that's what everyone involved with the hospital will tell you. The subsidy, the word that's used as the subsidy from Metro for the hospital, they say it goes to pay for uninsured patients, care like what you're describing. But again, like the big hospitals, they do have to treat people who come into the emergency room. So there is a cost there that maybe could be moved around, and maybe Nashville General is better equipped or better positioned to do that kind of work. And maybe the more intensive care should be transferred to those bigger, better equipped hospitals.
Is there a possibility that something like Nashville General is outdated in this day and age, and maybe Meharry students should just go train at the bigger, better hospitals too?
I think there are a lot of hurdles to that. A medical college needs an index hospital. That's the term they use. It's like the main hospital that their professors work at and that their students train at. Vanderbilt Medical Center already has Vanderbilt Medical School. So I think it's more challenging than that. I've asked that question too. And I think the relationship it goes both ways. So Nashville General having Meharry helps them staff their hospital. And that service, like you've said, is needed for a lot of residents in the city. And, it's in our Metro code that there will be a, safety net hospital. There was an effort, I'm sure you remember, several years back under Mayor Megan Barry. She commissioned the study and it came back and basically said they should end inpatient care at Nashville General and only do outpatient care. So it'd be more like a clinic than a hospital. You could go there and get shots and get your finger stitched up and things like that.
And that made a lot of people really hit the wall.
Yes, it upset a lot of people. There was a lot of rallying around the hospital. That's the context in which that question is getting discussed. I think it's been asked in a different way before. But there are a lot of, I think there's a lot of room for negotiation, I think, on like what type of hospital, whether it's the same size, whether it's dispersed in different places. I think those are all up for discussion.
I mean, it's such a Nashville story of this is a true institution that is beloved, especially amongst our Black North Nashville, Bordeaux communities. And it is an institution that a lot of people who live elsewhere in the city have no idea that it exists or what it does or what makes it special. It's clearly in distress on a variety of levels. In your reporting, have you heard anybody propose a plan that you think makes sense and could actually provide a stable future for Nashville General?
I don't know what would provide a stable future for Nashville General. To go back to what I've already said from Hildreth, he has this sort of grand vision of a collaborative ecosystem of healthcare in Nashville. I think that would take many years and a lot of important people sacrificing things. And so there's no promise that that could come to fruition. But I think if you have new leadership, it's a fresh start. Maybe the finances get kind of cleared up. That could be a step in the right direction.
Who would want to be the new director of Nashville General? Who would want to step into this?
Well, another piece of the financial report that was delivered to board members was about the director's pay, which is much higher than that of similar boards and commissions in Nashville, like the Convention Center.
How much higher?
Well, including this sort of deferred retirement payment, which was like he was getting 45% of his salary in addition as like deferred retirement. He was making, in the documents, it was upwards of in the high six figures. I don't know what the latest numbers are because that report was from a couple years ago, but it was a good bit higher than like the people who run the airport or the convention center. And it was also a lot higher than hospitals with similar revenues around the area. And so to answer your question, if it's that well paid, maybe there'd be a good pool of candidates. And I do think there are probably a lot of people who agree with the mission of Nashville General and Meharry and would want to do that service of helping make that hospital thrive and be a good resource for the community.
Well, let's hope so, because, yeah, we sure do need it. We need it to stick around. It benefits us all. All right, Stephen Elliott, thank you as always for your great reporting. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Y'all take care of each other.